In the stillness of the hospital room, Nyla Davis sat cradling her newborn twin daughters, Amelia and Skylar, a serene smile gracing her face. She marveled at their tiny hands, their gentle breathing, the profound gift of life she now held in her arms. Her husband, Darius, had briefly stepped out to speak with their doctor, leaving her in a moment of quiet joy. But the peace was short-lived, shattered by the sharp sound of the door creaking open. The man who entered carried an air of authority that was both imposing and unsettling. Officer Brent Calhoun, a name Darius had mentioned in passing, always with a tone of disapproval. Tall and broad-shouldered, Brent's presence seemed to fill the room with an oppressive energy. His uniform, which should have symbolized protection, felt more like a badge of unchecked power. Well, Brent drawled, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the bassinets. The judge's family. Must be nice to have everything handed to you. Nyla's heart quickened, but she steadied herself, her voice calm and measured. Can I help you, officer? Brent stepped closer, his gaze darkening with a malice that made Nyla instinctively tighten her grip on her daughters. You think you're untouchable, don't you? Your husband sits up there on his bench, handing out justice like he owns it. Nyla's jaw clenched. My husband is a good man. He does what's right. Brent scoffed, his sneer deepening. Good man? Right? People like him don't belong in power. And people like you don't deserve. He gestured to the babies, this kind of happiness. Fear coursed through Nyla, but she refused to let it show. Please leave, she said firmly. You have no right to be here. Brent's smirk widened. Oh, I have every right. I'm here to protect these babies from people like you. His words were venomous, laced with a hatred that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with prejudice. He reached for the bassinets, and Nyla's voice broke, desperation and fury blending in a single cry. Don't you dare touch them. At that moment, the door swung open again. Darius entered, his commanding presence immediately shifting the balance of power in the room. A respected judge with an unblemished reputation, Darius was known for his integrity and unwavering commitment to justice. His eyes locked onto Brent, cold and calculating. Step away from my family, Darius said, his voice low but filled with authority. Brent froze, his bravado faltering under Darius's piercing gaze. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat without a fight. He straightened, attempting to mask his unease with a forced smirk. Just doing my job, Judge Davis, making sure everything's in order. Darius's expression didn't waver. Your job doesn't involve harassing my wife and children. Leave. Now. Brent hesitated, his arrogance clashing with the realization that he'd overstepped. He shot Nyla a final, venomous glance before turning on his heel and storming out of the room. As the door clicked shut, Nyla exhaled shakily, her grip on Amelia and Skylar unrelenting. Darius moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Are you okay? He asked softly. Nyla nodded, though her voice trembled. He was going to take them. Darius. He said we didn't deserve them. Darius's jaw tightened, a storm brewing behind his calm exterior. He won't get away with this, he promised. Not this time. The events of that afternoon set off a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the confines of the hospital. Darius filed an official complaint against Brent, detailing the officer's actions and demanding an investigation. Word spread quickly, drawing the attention of local media and community leaders. For years, Brent Calhoun had operated with impunity, his misconduct shielded by a system that seemed designed to protect its own. But now, under the scrutiny of a public spotlight, cracks began to form in that shield. Nyla's story resonated deeply with people who had endured similar abuses of power. Women and men came forward, sharing their own encounters with Brent, their voices joining a growing chorus of those demanding accountability. Each story painted a chilling picture of a man who had weaponized his badge, using his authority to intimidate and oppress. For Darius, the fight was personal. He threw himself into the case, working late into the night to build an airtight argument against Brent. He combed through records, unearthed complaints that had been swept under the rug, and interviewed witnesses who had long been silenced by fear. Nyla, too, found herself at the center of the movement. Though the trauma of that day lingered, she drew strength from her daughters and the community rallying around her family. She began attending town halls, speaking out about the need for systemic change. Her quiet resilience inspiring others to stand up and demand justice. The courtroom was packed on the day of Brent's hearing. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls, their eyes fixed on the man who had terrorized so many. Brent sat at the defendant's table, his usual smirk replaced by a mask of defiance. But as witness after witness took the stand, recounting their experiences with him, that mask began to crack. One by one, they told their stories. A young man who had been falsely accused and humiliated in front of his family. An elderly woman who had been harassed during a routine traffic stop. A single mother whose children had been threatened. Each testimony added weight to the case, painting an undeniable portrait of abuse and corruption. When it was Nyla's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. She walked to the stand with quiet dignity, her gaze steady as she recounted the events of that day. Her voice trembled only once, when she spoke of Brent's attempt to take her daughters. "He told me I didn't deserve to be their mother," she said, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. "But he was wrong, and I'm here to prove it." By the time Darius delivered his closing arguments, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. He spoke with the passion of a man who had seen injustice too many times and refused to let it stand. "This is not just about one officer," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's about a system that allowed him to act with impunity, and about the people who have suffered because of it. Today, we have the chance to say enough." When the verdict was read, a collective breath seemed to escape the room. Brent Calhoun was found guilty on multiple counts of misconduct and abuse of power. He was stripped of his badge, his shield of protection gone. For the first time, he would face the consequences of his actions, his authority reduced to nothing more than a bitter memory. For Nyla and Darius, the victory was bittersweet. The fight had taken its toll, leaving scars that would take time to heal. But as they left the courthouse, hand in hand with their daughters, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their story had sparked a movement, one that would continue to push for accountability and change. As the months passed, reforms were implemented within the police department. Policies were enacted to increase transparency and hold officers accountable for their actions. Community oversight committees were formed, giving residents a voice in the system meant to serve them. And while the road ahead remained long, the Davis family's fight for justice had paved the way for a brighter future. Amelia and Skylar would grow up hearing the story of their parents' courage, of the day their family stood against injustice and refused to be silenced. They would learn the value of resilience, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest of trials. And as they carried those lessons forward, they would honor the legacy of a family that chose to fight for justice, no matter the cost.